All right, so we are in chapter 5 of our book, the last one. I didn't realize, or I guess I'm glad that this book was chosen because one, Mark is one of my favorite gospels, and two, it can get kind of deep, and I appreciated her a lot of her theology and a lot of things that she points out. So she begins in the Gospel of Matthew, in Matthew chapter 1. This is the nativity scene. And then we have a passage out of Mark where when it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. This was at Jesus's crucifixion. And someone ran and filled the sponge with sour wine on a stick, whether Elijah will come and take him down. Then Jesus, with a loud cry, breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And then there are 3 times in the Gospel of God. And if you recall, our first class in the noisy auditorium, there was a question that was asked, why didn't Jesus ever call himself the Son of God? And there are 3 times in the Gospel of Mark where Jesus is baptism, where Jesus is baptized, the clouds separate, and God says, this is my son. The second time is on the mountain of transfiguration. We've got Moses, Elijah, and Jesus on the top. We got people represent the law and the prophets. And God says, this is my son whom I love, listen to him. And then finally in Mark chapter 15, the centurion says, surely this is the Son of God. Now, if you recall, we're to read between the lines a little bit and add to the centurion's discourse or declaration. Surely this is the Son of God and not Caesar. Not Caesar. Remember, this is a Roman centurion. So if you recall, maybe if you remember, why wouldn't Jesus call himself the Son of God? He calls himself the Son of Man. In Mark, he doesn't call himself the Son of God. Do you recall why? It wouldn't have been easier if he just said, yep, that's me.
He wasn't taken down for about time that he would trigger some events that might eclipse end his ministry prematurely.
There could be a time where it could trigger some events where it end his ministry prematurely. I like that. Absolutely.
He would have been arrested immediately for blasphemy.
That would have been another one.
You would have thrown a party for him.
What's that?
You would have
thrown a party for him. Sure.
Kind you don't want to attend.
Yeah, crucifixion party.
Yeah.
You would think sometimes it'd be a lot easier. Now you recall, I use the example, a little bit different example. If I were to say, I'm the best chaplain in Aurora at Aurora hospitals. We've got 26 hospitals, by the way. Just acquired another 17 more.
That means you're really good.
Yes, that means I'm really good.
Do you have to go to all of them?
No, see that the 17 hospitals are in the South.
Mm.
Actually, it's Southeast United States. They just acquired Wake Forest Medical Center. We are now called Atrium Health officially. So there's another 17 hospitals. So we're number 5 in the nation. Not yet number 1. I'm sure more mergers are coming. Don't get me started on that, but nonetheless. So, well, yeah, exactly.
It's called Atrium this week.
What's that?
It's called Atrium this week.
Yes, right. Again, we're not number 1. We're only number 5. But anyway, so if I were to say I'm the best chaplain in Atrium Health, how would that sound then if someone else said, Darren, he's the best chaplain? Who are you going to believe? Myself? Tooting my own horn? or a bunch of other people?
The other guy.
Yeah, the others, absolutely. Yeah, you don't necessarily trust someone, at least me personally, that toots their own horn. I'm the best chaplain. I don't care what you say.
It's not very welcoming.
Yes, not at all, not at all. So 3 times Jesus is called the Son of God, and 2 times by God himself, and 1 time by the Roman centurion. So as we move down here, I'm on page 118. And I like what she talks about being what the Son of God means. I'm going to read a little bit of section here. It says, for Mark, the incarnation, by the way, incarnation means flesh, in the flesh. How many here like burritos, Mexican food? Yeah. My favorite burrito is a carne asada burrito. Carne, incarnation. Carne means meat. I'd be a vegetarian if meat didn't taste so good.
Famous last words.
Yes, exactly. So if you like carne asada burrito, this incarnation, this is in the flesh. In the flesh. So she's talking about the incarnation, and says in top of 118, it's the incarnation revealed in God who walks with us through the triumphs and tragedies of life, ultimately to our deaths. This is why the incarnational events in Mark are found not in the sweet baby Jesus, the cradle, but in Jesus's life and ministry, and especially in Jesus's dying on the cross. I would have to argue with her a little bit on this one, but we won't go there right now. Throughout Mark's gospel, Emmanuel is revealed in the one who is baptized in the Jordan. Just talked about that this morning. And tempted in the wilderness, who fed the hungry, touched the outcasts with compassion, healed the sick, calmed the seas, who confronted the powerful and noticed the powerless. Someone once wrote in a book, forget the author, but he talked about Jesus being God in sandals. I really like that. God in sandals. We're talking about the incarnation and then eventually the resurrection. Would you be, what if there wasn't? Well, go back to the end of Mark, where the short ending of Mark, where the women go to the tomb, they see that it's empty, and they get out of there, and they're scared because of their fear. And the original Mark's gospel ends right there. No resurrection, no resurrection stories, nothing. Would we be a Christian if this didn't happen?
Say it
Would
again.
you follow Jesus as a teacher if we didn't have any resurrection? If there wasn't? Notice in the Old Testament, we have people of faith from the book of Psalms all over. These are people of faith that follow God's directives, died for it. This is without any kind of, I mean, the resurrection is kind of a new thing when Jesus comes around. There's a little bit about a resurrection in the book of Daniel, but it depends on when you think Daniel is written, maybe written 100 or 200 years before Jesus. What if there wasn't a resurrection? What would you think?
What would be the point of
Okay.
believing?
No, it's still a good way to live your life.
Ah,
I once
okay.
made the argument to our previous minister that religion is sort of the green energy of faiths.
the green energy.
Faiths at the time, the Obama administration was trying to advocate this big green energy plan and get us off
Okay.
fossil fuels and foreign dependence on oil. And it's like, what's the worst possible thing that could happen? We'd burn less fossil fuels and we'd have less dependence on foreign oil. You know, what's wrong with that? So if it turned out that you die and you're done, it's still a good way to live your life.
Mhm. So what would be the point?
How many times in the book of Psalms do we hear about can the dead praise you? No. So these people of the Hebrew Bible, the First Testament, they had tremendous faith, not having any resurrection. I find that incredible. It's like, what, even if life is in the toilet, it was good to follow God and follow his commands. Because as Brian said, life is good. Life is better.
It's a good way to live it.
It's a good way to live.
The Ten Commandments should basically, or the sort of the short version of how to be a decent human being.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. So Mark spends very little time on the resurrection. And if we go to the end of the Gospel of Mark, the short ending, I mean, the angels say that he's going to be raised. He's not here. You live the life of a disciple of Jesus if it wasn't for the resurrection, if there wasn't a resurrection.
I like
Yeah.
the sentence that
Yes.
said Matthew's cradle is Mark's cross.
Yes. Yeah.
Tell me what that called.
Mhm.
And
What about
revolutionists
the-
have died for their causes.
Yeah.
And that's made people take it more seriously because, well, this person was willing to die for it.
Right.
What about this hearing that God, this is my son, the beloved,
Mhm.
listen to him? I wonder, that's confusing to me. Do you think the whole group of people that were there heard that, or was it just Jesus that heard that? I mean, this is pretty strong affirmation.
Hmm.
That
It's a good question. Who would have heard this? Well, it would have been the disciples, Peter, James, and John.
And likewise, the curtain of the temple being torn in two.
Mhm.
It was too late for me to look it up, trying to find some details about that. But is that a literal thing that
Mm.
Well,
happened?
nothing say- it
It's like a
doesn't
big
say that
tapestry or what? What is it?
darkness-
I was wondering about that too.
Well,
Darkness was, and then the temple was
Yes.
torn in two.
yeah,
Probably
What
the
I-
priests.
What I liked about it, what made me stop and think is I went back. And if the curtain was the separation between God and the people, because only the priests could go in there with their, heads down, and
Yeah.
it was the holy place. And I never, ever put it together that when Jesus died, that separation between God and people was taken away. To me, that was
Wow,
a pretty profound thing, but I never thought about
I
it.
hadn't thought of that either.
It means that we all can approach Jesus, not just, or God, not just the
This
priests.
is pre-Vatican too.
So it wasn't a literal physical kind of thing?
are you asking me my opinion? My opinion is no, it's not literal, but I think it's highly symbolic. I like that idea that, because that's where the curtain is that separates the, God from the people. And only the priest can go in there with a rope tied around his waist in case he passes out or something. Nobody can go in there, so they pull him out. So it is very much you can only see the backside of God, right?
So this
can
is
only
what
see the
this is what
backside.
The Hebrew priests would do. They would
So
go in.
Moses.
What's that?
I've not been in a synagogue before, so they would literally go behind a curtain.
That wouldn't be in a synagogue. That would be in a temple. That
Sorry,
would be in a
temple.
temple. Yeah. Yeah, they would literally go behind the curtain. Absolutely. Kind of like, somewhat like Wizard of Oz, but not quite.
Okay.
But yeah, no one else. I mean, there's a huge separation between the priest and the people. And
So they're the gatekeepers.
they definitely are. Yeah. So that curtain is very symbolic of that
Yeah, I never thought
separation.
about that.
Absolutely.
That's
So,
a really great point, Brian.
all right, let's talk about Son of God. You've heard of bar mitzvah. Bar mitzvah literally means son of the commandments. So bar or ben, like Ben Hur, that's son of her. And if you are female, this would be a bat mitzvah, daughter of the commandments. So at age 13 or thereabouts, the young Jewish males have a bar mitzvah. That means that they are now responsible, accountable to the commandments of God. I love the little the play on words, and you don't get this in English. When Moses, the name Moses, is an Egyptian form of son of. If you know the story of Moses, you know he struggles with who is he the son of, Egyptian or Jewish. And so there's I don't know if I'm pronouncing the name properly, but there is a what would you call him, a king, Pharaoh, Thutmose, M-O-S. And there's that word of son of in there. Who is he the son of? So you see Moses's life after he before he struggled with the burning bush, and then later on, he's trying to figure out who he's the son of. So we look at son of God. I think she rightly points out that the kings in the Hebrew Bible were considered the sons of God. Okay. Psalm chapter 2, verse 7 is actually where this 2 Samuel passage is quoted from. Psalm 2, verse 7. It says, I will proclaim the decree of the Lord. He said to me, you are my son. Today I've become your father. This is a song of David. So the king in Israel, the kings were called sons of God. Okay. So it's pretty significant that Jesus is called the Son of God. Not obviously by God himself, but also by the Roman centurion. Notice that this is before the resurrection. We get a lot of our theology from one of the first theologians, not Martin Luther, but before that. One of the first Christian theologians we get a lot of our theology from. Let me read a passage out of Romans about this. So Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ Jesus, called to be an apostle, set apart for the gospel of God, the gospel he promised beforehand through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures, regarding his son, who as to his human nature was a descendant of David, and who through the Spirit of the holiness was declared with power to be the Son of God by his resurrection from the dead. What does Mark say? When does Jesus become the Son of God?
Pre-resurrection.
Yes, right at his baptism. Mountain of Transfiguration. And then the centurion. So,
So he was revealed as the Son of God. Before that, it was hidden, but those experiences exposed him to, for lack of better words, the community. Whereas
Okay.
before that, he was trying to keep who he was hidden.
he was, yep. But we're seeing him revealing as the Son of God in Mark at his baptism, Mountain of Transfiguration, and at the cross. Paul says he's declared the Son of God by the resurrection. Okay, which is it? Just know, and I don't have the answer to this, but just know this is still this continues to be a theological point for Paul. I think he espouses what's called the adoption theory, and that Jesus is adopted as a son of God. Where is the Son of God in the Gospel of John, where would he be? He's actually a little bit more than the Son of God, perhaps.
He was from God. He is the
the
word.
beginning.
From the beginning.
Yeah.
In the beginning was the Word was God, the Word was with God. So wait a minute here, we've got different scenarios. And I think this is very similar to Carol's question early on. When did Jesus know he was human? I think it's going to depend on who you ask. But just know there's a little bit, Mark kind of stands out a little bit as declaring Jesus as the Son of God. And then Paul doesn't have him Son of God until his resurrection.
Help me out a little bit. What did the angel first tell when Mary was to be given birth? What was described then as to who she was going to give birth to?
Well, let's see. God with us, Emmanuel. Let's see.
That was kind of the first revelation, wasn't it?
Well, I'm going to go to Luke then, because I think that's where Mary gets told. Now, recall this, we're looking at primarily at Mark. So the other gospels are going to be different. Let's see. Chapter 1 of Luke, it says, in the 6th month, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, town in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, descendant of David. Virgin's name was Mary. The angel went to her, said, "Greetings, you are highly favored." Mary was greatly troubled. The angel says, "Do not be afraid, Mary. God's found favor. You will be with child and give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus. He will be great and be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David and will reign over the house of Jacob forever. His kingdom will never end." Here again is a different time when Jesus is called the Son of God. That probably asks more questions than it answers. But just know there's difference.
May I ask a question that's bothered me for quite some time? You
And
know, we
Ken can answer that then.
Jesus is born of, David's line, we say.
Mhm, yeah.
But Joseph Mary wasn't a descendant of, and Joseph was really no relation to Jesus. Was he? It was yeah, it was the Holy Spirit and Mary. So how come that is?
How come?
That he's considered in the line of David when Joseph was a descendant in there, not Mary.
Pastor Ken?
You know the answer?
Yeah.
Wasn't Mary
could-
of the house of
Feel
David?
free to
No.
jump right in.
We don't know
We
where
can-
Mary came from. We don't know her lineage, do we?
No,
Ken,
because
can you
back then
answer
they
that?
usually did just fine.
In a nutshell.
I know.
Now, if in Luke, she is some relation to Elizabeth, the mother of John the
Yeah.
Baptist.
So that's the
So,
connection.
but we don't know the extent of the relation. Fifth cousin once removed, who knows? Okay. But in the genealogy, especially Matthew's genealogy, the genealogy flows through the men.
Mhm.
And so I don't think any Jew at the time, or even asked that question, it would have seemed perfectly straight to them that yes, he's from David. And also, especially in the Gentile world, in Luke's readership, adoption was a fairly common practice, even as an adult. To be, a man my age might adopt a man in his 30s as his son, especially if I didn't have any children. And so, but then you were of my house and lineage, even though I'm not your biological father, you're still my son. You trace your lineage back through that.
But nowadays, your lineage as Jew is traced through your mom.
Mhm.
I thought it was through the mother,
It's interesting. isn't
because
it?
the religion
Yeah.
is,
It's rumbled through my head for years.
The 116 in Matthew, it says, and Jacob gives the lineage of David, and Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called the Christ.
Yeah.
So it didn't say son of Joseph, obviously, as you pointed out. So
Well, what I want to ask the teacher is, now that the Bible gives all these different understandings of when and how Jesus is declared to be the Son of God, is it okay if we agree that yes, Jesus is in some way the Son of God, but we can have our own personal opinion on when Jesus became the Son of God, whether it was before time or whether Jesus was adopted in Mark when he's a grown man, or is it when he was raised from the dead? Can we all agree to disagree and still get along, or do I have to kill all of you who think differently than I do?
well, it depends on from what faith tradition you are. But,
Yeah.
but yeah, absolutely. Just yeah, and know that there are different understandings of Jesus and when he became God's son, and even the resurrection. Paul is definitely on board with this forgiveness of sins at the resurrection, because of the resurrection, being baptized. Boy, that's Paul through and through. Just know that's where it comes from. And through the years, there has been a lot of blood spilled on these very questions. The Arian controversy about the Trinity. Is he the from very God? He's what is the Apostles' Creed? One of them talks about him being by very nature God.
So I think it's Nicene.
Nicene.
Very God of
Nice.
very God, begotten,
Yeah.
not made,
Yes.
godly for all creation.
No, a creed like that's almost written as a rival against or a polemic, because there are others at the time that believe that Jesus was born a human and became the Son of God, or was declared divine later on. Good Christians, but the winners got to choose, got to make the creed. And
Yeah.
then you stop.
history is written by the victors.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So
Carol.
so just know that there is difference. And yes, as Ken pointed out, I think it is a-okay to have different understandings. It's not a monolithic thing here on the identity of Jesus, when he was the Son of God, when he was declared divine. Is it okay to see it as John would see it? He was there in the beginning? Absolutely. Boy, there was a lot of bloodshed on the people that saw it differently, that had scriptural support for their stance, but yet because it was against the mainstream or the winners, then you are a heretic.
But even when you look at the scriptures and look at the differences just between the four gospels that are all writing essentially the same story, but it's how it was interpreted. And over my lifetime, when I've been to Bible studies or even just talking with people, and they bring up concerns like, well, who really said that, Jesus was the Son of God or whatever. And it's like, I didn't get that, or I don't believe that part. But it's kind of like, if we all watched the same movie, or if we all went to the same lecture or read the same book, we'd have a dozen different interpretations of what that was about. And that doesn't mean necessarily that any of us are wrong or that someone has all the right answers. It's just, it's your perspective and from your life experiences and stuff, how you understand the writing, that what you hear, whatever. And, you know, that's okay, because we don't all have to think like a bunch of minions that were all the same.
And weren't those each written in a different period of time?
What?
The different gospels?
Oh, yes.
Were
Mhm.
different, periods of time, so then there's been different reflection and
And these
life
stories-
experience and stories, and the way the stories are passed on.
Yeah, because they didn't have it written down like we do. They just passed it word of mouth.
Yep.
Well, did you ever play that
Yeah.
game telephone?
Telephone or mailman or
yes.
something like that, yeah.
Was Mark the first?
So when was Mark the first? I was considered the earliest. A lot of scholars believe it was the earliest gospel. So yes, the latest gospel probably is the Gospel of John, written around the late 90s for the first century. Mark, they believe, 60? Did you say 60?
63.
Something like that, 30 years after Jesus' death.
Memories
And did
wouldn't
he
have faded in
know,
that time.
did he know Jesus?
Did Mark know
Was he
Jesus?
one of the disciples or no?
Fill us in here, Darren. I've
Yeah.
wondered about that all my life.
You
buddy.
guys, come
Fill
on.
us in here.
Hard access.
Yeah.
Well,
There's some
it's
question
all a
about
mystery
it.
and we can't
It
go
is.
Right,
back and prove it, but
We'd be God
But
if
it-
we know.
Remember, it is, the titles of these gospels is according to Mark,
Mhm.
according to Matthew, according to Luke, according to John. I think that in the Greek, it's kata Johannes, according to John. So where was I going now? That all these good questions that I can't answer.
I think, Carol, I think it was a question that you asked.
God must
What?
have about
Well, that
God
is
being-
Mark, was
Was
he
he,
an
or did
eyewitness?
he know Jesus? Is what you had asked.
no, before that it was who heard God say.
On the Mountain of Transfiguration?
Yeah, or and the baptism, and that, to me, there would have been more, there was supposedly a lot of people at the baptism, wasn't there?
Yes, that would have been, I think, it says at the time Jesus came to Nazareth, let's see, this messenger. So this is John the Baptizer was in the Jordan. Time Jesus came from Nazareth to Galilee, baptized by John in the Jordan, that Jesus was coming up out of the water. Few verses ahead of that, the whole Judean countryside and all the people of Jerusalem went out to him, to John the Baptizer, confessing their sins, baptized by him in the Jordan River. So I'm going to assume from what that verse said that there were a lot of people around when he was baptizing. So, okay, so many questions, not too many answers. So Emmanuel, for Mark, the decisive revelation of Emmanuel of Jesus being God with us comes at the crucifixion. Are we okay with that? God with us comes at the crucifixion. This is what I was going to ask. When did Christianity become about a religion about beliefs? Because you got these words like orthodoxy, orthopraxis, orthodoxy, straight teaching, orthopraxis, straight doing.
Wasn't there a council of Constantinople? Is that when it started and became like the state religion?
Yes, the official religion of the Roman government, 324-ish, on or about. Constantine made it the official religion.
Kind of ironic,
What's that?
sort of ironic.
It is, yes. Incidentally, Constantine wasn't baptized until his deathbed.
Mm.
It's a good way to get out of a lot of sins.
It is. That's
I mean, I
exactly
was raised
right.
Catholic, I thought, just wait till you're ready, the last 5 minutes in it.
Yeah. But the problem is you don't know that. Don't know when that is.
Yeah.
But I was always bothered by why is it? I mean, we've got all these creeds. Each denomination has their creeds. And the denomination I was from didn't have a written creed, but it was implied. And you can believe in these things, but be the biggest jerk on the planet,
Or say you believe in it.
or say you believe in them. I'm bothered that sometimes it seems like Christianity comes down to a set of beliefs. If you just believe this way. Incidentally, when these creeds started coming out in the early 4th century, Christianity went from being the persecuted to the persecutors. Because you don't believe like this, well, then you're not one of us.
So isn't that what Mark is saying, that instead of to be a Christian, I guess to be a Christian would be to follow, look at what Jesus did, look at what he said. Now it's your job to go out and do the same thing. To me, that would be a Christian, because you can espouse all these other things, but unless you live like that, how can you call yourself a Christian? And it seems to me that that's what Mark is saying.
Okay.
You gotta follow, you have to do those things that Jesus showed us how to do. This is what it means to be human. And I think we forget
Ah.
that as Christians, because we're so far removed from
I like that. Yeah.
the original.
This is what it means to be human. And I like the word that Pastor Ken uses a lot, disciple.
Mhm.
Disciple is a learner. Someone who doesn't stop learning, is always learning. In undergraduate, we had to memorize where the disciples were first called Christians.
Mm.
That was our first verse, Acts 11 in Antioch. They're first called Christians. So disciple, I think, is a little bit better word in my opinion. But I do continue to think that oftentimes in the Christian world, it becomes more about beliefs, believing the right things. And that's bothersome to me. As soon as the creeds were start laying out, that then you start making boundaries.
Start
Saying, "You guys
codifying
got-"
it.
What's that?
Start codifying it.
Yes, yeah.
You know, there's a line somewhere in this last chapter, and it says, be the tangible embodiment of Christ's presence.
Mm.
Where is
The
that?
feet and the hands. Yes.
That in your 124 would be someone with some skin.
Yes, the little girl's prayer
Mhm.
or the poem Incarnation.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. Someone with some skin.
mhm.
There was a
In the
thing, I
game
heard
or
sometime
just
when I
in-
was working hospice, or somebody else was saying, once in a while you need a God with skin on. You know, that somebody shows up and is your, is there at the right time, listening or whatever.
Yeah.
And she said that to one group and they thought I was being blasphemous. Like,
Oh,
God with skin on.
Yeah.
In the previous chapter, the last sentence. Well, yet the angel beckons us to see Christ beyond the tomb. There we will see him. Mark ends the gospel with the same revelation concealment paradox. Christ is risen, but it remains for you and me to discover his presence in all the places and circumstances where he goes ahead of us. So I think I couldn't answer that last time, but I think we have to figure out where we've encountered Christ in our life.
It goes to that, my favorite parable about the sheep and the goats. You know, I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. What you did for the least of these, you did for me. To me, that just kind of sums it up. You know, that's what we're supposed to do. I was sick, you visited me. I was thirsty, you gave me a cup of cold water. And that really, for me, what that does, that takes everything out of the equation. You know, about these questions of, you know, when was Jesus the Son of God? When was he human? Did he know that? And all the stuff that people fuss and fight over and kill one another for. And that's always bothered me. And so I guess I look at that parable as, you know, being the hands and the feet of Jesus. And we don't even have to say anything. We don't have to bring up Jesus's name. I mean, this is stuff we do. And so,
Can I just say?
yes, please.
When Lou was diagnosed with MS, it was the people that showed up.
Mhm.
And I think that goes back to what Deb said before. It's not just the beliefs, you know, which are important. You need something to like hang on to.
Mhm.
But it's the actions. I mean, people can say all kinds of things, but it's what they do that really tells you
Yep.
what they're about.
Well, in verse or in page 125, it says, you do it. That's Christ's message to us, his followers. You feed the hungry. You share what you have. You care for the poor. You give second chances. You stand up for the powerless. You comfort the grieving. Christ summons us to be his presence in the world so that others may know Emmanuel, that God is with them. Amen and amen. Okay. So
Even those next couple words, love becomes embodied.
Yeah.
Through all those actions,
yeah, so
not of me, but
a-
in me, you know.
as Nike's slogan says, just do it. You know, do
Yeah.
it. You do it. I did a reflection for our senior leaders the other day at work, and it's in the season of making New Year's resolutions and goals. And anybody ever read Mark Manson, his book, not associated with Charles Manson, Mark Manson? The titles of his books are very risque. The first title was Everything is Screwed Up, and I'm using that word, and I'm using a different word. It's a book about hope. He quotes, says, don't hope, don't despair. Be kind, be compassionate, be gracious. And he ends it with, be human. And this idea, hoping for something better, I think we all want that hope, have that hope. But instead of saying, boy, I hope 2023 is going to be better, be better. And as Tracy points out, you feed the hungry. You, take care of the poor. Kind of what Carol was saying, I like this Matthew 25 where the people were out taking care of the poor, the hungry, the thirsty, and the sick. And come judgment day, the sheep and the goats are getting separated, and the sheep said, well, when did we see you do this? In other words, they weren't looking for, oh, I hope somebody sees me do this. They were just showing up with casseroles or whatever the case may be. They weren't looking for a pat on the back. That was part of their lifestyle. The goats were saying, gee, we didn't see you. Man, where were you? I didn't see you. You know, kind of looking for that pat on the back, if you will. So, yeah, just do it. As Tracy points out, and I think that Mark tells us, just do it. So this pattern, as Tracy points out in her book earlier on in this chapter, there are a lot of resurrection stories in the Gospel of Mark. And it got me thinking that, you know, this is a pattern. This is the pattern of, as we approach Lent and the Easter season, the pattern of dying and rising is really not just the pattern for Jesus, but also for his disciples. You think about it. There couldn't be a resurrection without a crucifixion. You think in your life, the times that you were perhaps changed, transformed. Think of those times. I'm going to guess it's not when you went to Disneyland that you were transformed. And I got to thinking, I wonder how much of a metaphor this is for us too. This dying and rising, these resurrection stories. We can't have a resurrection without a crucifixion. We're not transformed until we go through perhaps some difficulties. What do you think? Am I just stretching for stuff? Or?
No, it's really good
I
point.
just share a story.
Yes.
So back in 2018, I had a car accident, which I'm sure you're all are familiar with, messed up my body. I hardly walked for 6 months, totally changed my life completely for a long period of time. And I had my 2 nieces and my husband in the car with me. And 5 months after that car accident, my niece, who was in the front seat, and like we literally thought we were all gonna die because the truck pulled out in front of us on the highway. We all survived. But then 5 months later, she was diagnosed with cancer. And literally a year later, she's dead. But the thing that really struck in my mind is in the process of her dying, my body was coming back to life. And I literally thought, as she's dying, I'm being resurrected.
Okay. Okay.
And the family asked me to play for her funeral, and I thought, oh my gosh, how can I play for my 13-year-old niece's funeral? And so I ended up having to compose something because there wasn't anything that I could find that was appropriate. And so at the end of the piece, the piece kind of chronicles her last year of life. Well, actually from her infancy to her death. And the last part is about her resurrection in heaven and being reborn. And it was felt really profound composing it because I felt like it was chronicling my experience of going through this car accident too, of dying and being resurrected. So
I like that.
that was my personal
Yeah.
experience.
I just finished reading a book entitled A Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler. And it's like a thick book. And he is a screenwriter for in Hollywood. He helped write Lion King. And so in it, he lists 17 stages, if you will, of what makes a good movie. And the movie that he often goes back to is The Wizard of Oz. But in these 17 stages, there's always, you start out in the original world and something happens and you get transformed. And the last stage is resurrection for him. You come back to where you were, but you're changed. Whether it be you get the prize, you get the girl, the guy, or wisdom. But I liked it. So if you think about what makes a movie great, are those times where you go through the difficult times like that. And so I got to thinking, how much of that is like our life? Of you go through some difficult things and you are resurrected, you are changed, and you come back, and first of all, you find out you can't go home again, but you are changed from where you were before. And if you think about the movies that are real, the classic, the good
Yeah.
movies,
The hero's journey.
the hero's journey, there you go. Yes, from Joseph Campbell. It is a spin-off from the hero's journey. Yep, absolutely. So I got to wonder that the Gospel of Mark, thinking about it in my own life, are there times that I learned the most, that I was changed the most, that I perhaps changed so much, I almost thought that I died, not physically, but because of events, I'm changed so much that I'm not even recognizable, at least for me. I wonder how true that is in all of our lives.
You referenced how your faith will change in the Bible, based on the notes you took.
Yep. I tell you what changed me more than anything, probably, is pandemic. That surprised me to where I am now from what it was in 2019. I don't even recognize myself. It was that bad. Things rocked my world so much. I don't ever want to go through that again. But man, oh man, am I ever different. So anyway, that was that I cringe when I hear about COVID numbers going up, and I'll tell you, I'd be tempted to walk away from what I do if we had another surge like we did. It was difficult. But anyway, so we think about in your life those times that changed you. And have you come back? Have you been resurrected? And how that made you different? Kind of like what with Jesus, with these resurrection stories, if you will, in the Gospel of Mark. Questions or comments on that? Maybe it's a disease that caused an illness, a near-death experience.
When my niece was murdered, I had to face a lot of demons. I had to face my wanting to go dance on the murderer's grave. I had to learn forgiveness. And that was a journey. It was a journey. It took years for me, but it was such a life-changing thing that I look at. I will never be that same person I was before that, because I had to face some demons, and I had to acknowledge that there are things that you don't understand, but you need to forgive. And I had to learn to look at the Patrick, who was the one who murdered her. I had to be able to say his name. It took me years to be able to say his name. And so to me, it was, can you forgive? Can you forgive the people who took something very precious from you? As Jesus on the cross forgave people who murdered him. And you're right. There's so many things that happen in your life that you come face to face with God, in a sense that, okay, this is what I'm asking you. Is it worth the cost? Is it worth the cost?
Yeah.
But you're changed. You're just changed.
Sometimes it's grief that'll do it to you as well. I mean, when you change you know, you can't help but be changed in that regard. But I just wonder in this death and resurrection pattern that we see, I think that plays out in our lives too. I think very much so. And maybe currently it is happening in your life right now. It's something that is, maybe you're dying inside for because of something. Yeah, I think those are the times where we're so changed. Think of it, going back to the movie metaphor, think of your favorite movie and what makes a good movie. And think about those areas, the entering a new world and starting from the original world and going through difficult times, getting changed, and then coming back, kind of like you were resurrected.